بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I would like to start my lecture tonight with congratulating in advance for the birth anniversary of Lady Zahra Salamullah alayha, which also in some countries is known as Mother Day or Wife Day. So inshallah, we benefit from these occasions, auspicious occasions, to know more about Lady Zahra, to know more about the school of Ahlul Bayt, and to, inshallah, improve and to go further in our spiritual journey, inshallah. So the discussion, as Brother Musalla just explained, it is the third session on the famous and well-known letter of Imam Ali alayhi salam to Malik al-Ashtar. In the first session, I introduced the letter and also talked about the historical circumstances within which the letter was written and issued. Why Ali alayhi salam wrote this letter, what was the circumstances at the time, the threats and the concerns of Ali alayhi salam, why he chose to send Malik as the governor of Egypt. The second session was about Malik al-Ashtar himself. I explained in the second session the importance of taking into account the recipient of such a letter. It was because of Malik's unique capacities, and that Ali alayhi salam knew that whatever he gives Malik, he is able of implementing them properly. So it contributed to the richness of the letter, because Ali alayhi salam knew whatever advice he gives, it would not be wasted. We discussed about Malik characteristics and how important was his status and his contribution to the rule of Ali alayhi salam, and how Ali alayhi salam valued him, as some mentioned, like his right hand. We also discussed very briefly about what makes this letter unique, different, special. One of the most comprehensive and rich documents in explaining, in clarifying the political perspective of Islam, the principles of rule in Islam. Many of the similar documents written later, actually they borrowed from this letter. So this is the source of the Islamic perspective, Islamic view, the Islamic picture of what a rule ought to be, the ideal rule that Ali alayhi salam portrays from an Islamic perspective. I also mentioned that this letter is the largest letter that we have in Nahj al-Balagha, the longest letter that we have in Nahj al-Balagha, and it has very detailed, and Ali alayhi salam did not neglect to highlight those points that he saw them important on understanding the Islamic view of rule and what a ruler ought to do, his responsibilities towards the people, towards himself, so on and so forth. The letter talks and touches on important issues like, for example, what are the priorities of a rule? What are the main categories that a ruler is responsible to attend to them? About, for example, intelligence services, about what they are allowed and what they are not allowed to do, about the private life of the people, the way that people should be treated by the government, about the necessity of opening the ground for people to criticize the rule. I will discuss it later. It's very beautiful how Ali alayhi salam puts it there, about what it means to about the rules treatment of different groups of the people, like business owners. What is a government's responsibility towards them? How a governor ought to treat this group of the people, and what is the role that these people they play in the community as a whole? What does it mean to be أشداء على الكفار رحماء بينهم? To be merciful, to be compassionate when treating the people within your community, and to be strong and steadfast in standing against foreign threats from outside. So there are many beautiful, many important points that Ali alayhi salam touches, explains, elaborate in this letter. What I'm going to discuss tonight is the beginning of the letter. Ali alayhi salam starts his letter after mentioning the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most compassionate, the most merciful. He starts with explaining the main categories of responsibilities that a ruler has to address them, has to pay attention to them, to know that these are the domains that he has responsibility to take care of them. He starts with saying, هذا ما أمر به عبد الله علي أمير المؤمنين مالك بن الحارث الأشتر. This is that with which Ali, the servant of Allah and the commander of the faithful, ordered Malik ibn al-Harith al-Ashtar في عهده عليه حين والله مصر جباية خراجها وجهاد عدوها واستصلاح أهلها وعمارة بلادها. In his instruction to Malik, when he appointed him as the governor of Egypt, these are 4 categories. Ali alayhi salam mentions that he ordered Malik to take care of them. جباية خراجها, to collect the tax, وجهاد عدوها, to fight against its enemies, واستصلاح أهلها, to reform its people, وعمارة بلادها, to develop their life conditions, the territories, the land. These are the main categories that Ali alayhi salam mentions. Although very brief, but looking and reflecting on the categories that Ali alayhi salam defines here, sheds light on important aspects of Islamic perspective of rule, and the way that Ali alayhi salam looks at the rule, its responsibilities, and the services that it must give the people, the relationship between the rule and the people, the relationship between governor and his subjects. So the first category that Ali alayhi salam mentions here is what he refers to as to collect its tax. In other words, Ali alayhi salam starts with highlighting the responsibility of a ruler for economic administration, to take care of the financial matters of the territory that he governs. It's interesting why Ali start with this. So he starts with mentioning that it is your responsibility to collect the tax. And later on, he explains in the letter that how the collected tax should be spent for the advantage of the people. But it seems to me that maybe the reason that Aliyah Islam starts with this category is because none of the other government's responsibility can be properly achieved and fulfilled without having a proper economic administration, without having resources, without having financial means. The government will not be able to fulfill its other duties. So maybe that's one of the reasons that Ali Salam starts with highlighting this point, that your first responsibility is to have a proper financial administration to collect the tax, and later on explains how to spend that to improve the life of the people. So when we are talking about the later categories, about the providing security, building developments, reforming people, all of these tasks, they require they have certain costs. They require financial resources. Even when we are talking about spiritual growth, as I will discuss it under the category of reforming people, the way that alayhi salam describes it. Even when it comes to spiritual growth, it is also intertwined with economic situation of a country, of a nation. The famous hadith that you properly heard about, كاد الفقر أن يكون كفرا. Poverty is close to lead to disbelief, to lead to ungratefulness. So when people struggle financially, when their mind is occupied with providing for their families, they may not be any more concentrated, committed to their spiritual goals that they have to follow. So this is a very important point about the economic administration of a rule that Allah mentions as the first task of a ruler. And later on explains, as I mentioned, that this is to improve the lifestyle of the people. And he also warns that collecting tax should come after you build up the country, after you provide the country with circumstances that people can work, people that can have comfortable life, businesses can flourish, then they can pay you tax. Otherwise, getting tax from the people when they are struggling, when the businesses does not work as expected, it just ruins the country. That's what Ali Salam mentions later. Again, so it is just to highlight the importance of this point, this category, in contributing to the fulfillment of the remaining categories, the other categories. The second category that Ali Salam mentions as one of the categories that a ruler must take care of it, must pay specific attention to it, is what he refers to as to fight against its enemies. Is the matter of maintaining the security in the country. We have this famous hadith from Ali alayhi salam that he mentions, نعمتان مجهولتان. There are two blessings that most people, they are forgetting about them. They ignore them. الصحة والأمان, health and security, safety. Sometimes it is actually the fact that we always think about what we don't have, about those kind of maybe certain provisions, certain tools, having a car, having a good house, so on and so forth. And we neglect to realize what we already have. the health that we have, the security that we have, in because of which then we can work, we can have our mind at ease and take care of our family, the needs of our family, take care of the other responsibilities that we have. So this is a very important point about a ruler's responsibility to maintain the security. And it is not that simple. It's a single advice, but it is a multifaceted task that requires attention to many branches. So, for example, a rule to guarantee the safety and security of its people must have a strong army to defend borders, must have a strong domestic police force to maintain order within the community. And these force need to be highly motivated and morally strong, otherwise they will not fulfill their duties. The maintaining security and safety, having a strong army requires capable and wise leadership, requires proper military equipments, required satisfied force who are willing to put their lives on the line to protect their people, requires technological developments, requires proper training, so on and so forth. So I just mean that it's just the title of a category that later on Allah would explain. There are many considerations that a ruler must take into account if he wants to fulfill his duties in maintaining the safety and security of a community. The next point that Ali alayhi salam mentions, the next category that Ali alayhi salam mentions is وَاسْتِصْلَاحُ أَهْلِهَا, reforming its people, to reform its people. I think it's very beautiful, important point that Ali alayhi salam indicates just in this short advice, short 2 words except استصلاح أهلها. What does it mean, استصلاح أهلها? So istislah, so the al-islah in Arabic means reform, and istislah means seeking reform. And the root salaha, and when we are talking, for example, something is in Arabic they say لصالح شخص, it means to its benefit. So in other words, Imam talks about a kind of reform of the people that would be to their advantage, to their benefit, reforming them for the better, reforming them so that they can actualize more potentials that they have. So if we look at the lens that Ali alayhi salam uses to look at the responsibilities of the government, and when he talks about reforming the people, the role that he considers for the rule, for the government, that in changing and improving people, not just the conditions of their life, but to improve themselves, to improve the people themselves, spiritually, mentally, intellectually. Just to explain briefly, so we as humans, we are those social creatures. We are products of the environment within which we grow up. We are products of the family, the parents who taught us, who contributed their knowledge to us. who guided us. We are products of the circles of friends that we are picking. Their attitude, their manners, their morals, their views, they are affecting us, making us, shaping who we are. The circles of colleagues, when we are working the workplace, those people who we interact with them most days of the week, and the community as a whole, what we call it, a culture. So the community, different levels of the community, whether it's family, friends, colleagues, or broader sense of the community, the culture, this is what makes us who we are today. That's why Ali Salam mentions that it is a government's responsibility to reform people for what is better for them. In other words, the government has the means and power to do that. That's why alayhi salam expect his governor to do it. A government has the power to control what information people can get, what information should be concealed from the people, for example. The government has those propagation tools, what direction people should be pushed to, and what directions the government sometimes try to distract people from them. The matter of media, advertisements, propagation, TV, movies, radio, social media, so on and so forth. They are all tools that government can use to shape its people, to change its people for a better or worse. Education system, institutions that engage in social works. So that's why we have so many warnings in Quranic perspective, in what we have in hadiths, that a corrupted, oppressive, deviated rule can lead its people astray. So what we have in chapter Nisa, verse 97, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ تَوَفَّاهُمُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ ظَالِمِي أَنفُسِهِمْ. Indeed, those whom the angels take away their soul while they are wronging themselves. A sinner, someone who is deviated from path, he is wronging himself before the others. ظَالِمِي أَنفُسَهُمْ. قَالُوا فِيمَ كُنْتُمْ. Then the angels, they ask those people who were occupied with those material gains, with those distractions, and forgot their main goal. What state were you in? فِيمَ كُنْتُمْ. They respond, قَالُوا كُنَّا مُسْتَضْعَفِينَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. They reply, we were oppressed in the land. We were living in a country, in a land that we were not be able to flourish, to work on our spiritual aspect. So the environment, the cultures, so on and so forth, just pushed us towards materialism, towards what we thought was important but did not have any value. We just realized it. However, this excuse is not accepted, because then the angels of Allah, they address them. They say, was not Allah's earth vast enough so that you might migrate in it? So couldn't you just, if that the situation was so difficult that you realize that you cannot maintain your faith, that you realize that you cannot protect your children, if you do it, that's fine. But if you realize that I can't do it, then the angels of Allah, they say, didn't you have the option to migrate? Or somewhere else, somewhere you can protect yourself, somewhere you can protect your children. So the verse clearly talks about the influence, the important impact that a community, a culture, a rule can have on the spiritual journey and path of people. So this is why alayhi salam mentions that you are, as my governor, you have the responsibility to direct, to guide people, not just a matter of the providing for the material needs, but just also guiding them spiritually, to let them flourish in the spiritual aspects. So, in other words, in Islamic perspective, the way that Ali al-Islam talks about istislahu ahliha. He later on talks about the development of the life circumstances, but right now he talks about istislahu ahliha, reforming the people. It shows this view, this perspective, that the reform is not merely about the material condition, the life condition of the people, but first and foremost, it concerns the spiritual growth. So the government is responsible to ensure that the public atmosphere, the cultural environment, they contribute, at least in general, to the spiritual well-being of the people. So through the history, what we learned, we saw, we heard, we read, there were so many rules that they invested on occupying their people's mind with what matters the least compared to their spiritual and intellectual growth. Young generations were raised in a social environment that converses them, that on daily basis, through the media, through all the education systems, so on and so forth, that life is primarily about more money, more power, material pleasure, drugs, alcohol, sex, so on and so forth. Few people, you see them, they look at how morally fulfilled a person as a criterion for one's success. They look at how much money he has, how much power he has. Few care about how the government acts, for example, in their name on political grounds, as long as their needs are fulfilled, as long as they are well-fed, well-entertained, so on and so forth. But in an Islamic ideal of rule, what Ali alayhi salam mentions, what Ali alayhi salam portrays, the government ought primarily to prepare the ground for people's spiritual, moral, and intellectual flourishment rather than material needs. They are important as well, but the priority should go to these immaterial needs of human soul. So a society that is infected with oppression, social discrimination, ruled by self-centered people, such a society would be a major obstacle to one's spiritual growth. Poverty, corruption, fear, so on and so forth, all of them push people to make choices that would significantly hinder their spiritual growth and development, and lead them to a spiritual degradation and even demise of the spiritual journey, the death of the soul while the body still is alive. But you see the perspective that Islamic scripture, Quran, talks about, highlight this point, the kind of intertwined relationship between the circumstances of life in this world and the spiritual growth of people and their eternal well-being. We have in chapter Hadith, verse 25, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا رُسُلَنَا بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ وَأَنزَلْنَا مَعَهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْمِيزَانِ. Certainly we sent our apostles, our messengers, with manifest proofs, and we sent with them the book and the balance. لِيَقُومَ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ. What's the purpose? Why Allah sends those messengers? So that mankind may maintain justice. It's about social justice. لِيَقُومَ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ. Ayatollah Jawadi is one of the most well-known, celebrated contemporary exegetes of the Quran. He explains the meaning of the verse when being put next to verses like وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I didn't create humankind and jinn except for they would be able to serve me, to be the true servants, which, as other verses explain, means as a matter of not, Allah doesn't need our service. It's a way for human perfection. When we serve the ultimate existence, when we serve the pure existence, when we serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it actually, this is actualizes our potential. This is what leads us towards the status of being Khalifatullah, representative of divinity, to reach to the level كَانَ قَابَ قَوْسَيْنِ أَوْ أَدْنَى, to the level that even the angels of Allah cannot reach that level, to the level that the angels of Allah would prostrate before Adam, for humankind. So that verse says that the purpose of the creation is for human to reach that spiritual perfection by obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by trying to manifest those moral characteristics that in its pure and highest possible form is manifested in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to get close to those values, those morals. However, when we put it next to this verse, which says that the purpose of prophethood was to maintain social justice in the community, so Ayatollah Jawadi explained that it means that the maintenance, the establishment of social justice in the community is not an end in itself, rather is an end towards the higher end, which is for humankind to get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and reach to that spiritual level that no other creature can reach. However, this is the way, this is the path, this is the ground. And in a community, in a society that is polluted, infected with social discrimination, with corruption, with moral corruption, so the ground, the possibility of a spiritual growth becomes very limited, very difficult. So these two go hand in hand, maintaining social justice in the community, treating people equally, respecting individual rights. It is the ground for the spiritual perfection of humankind. This is a very beautiful perspective, and that's why you see alayhi salam highlights the role of a governor, the responsibilities of a ruler to take care of these matters. The fourth category that Ali alayhi salam mentions here is what he mentions as imaratu biladaha, to develop its territories, developing the life conditions of the people. So unlike the earlier category, which was about seeking to reform the people, especially the spiritual well-being, maintaining social justice, so on and so forth, this category seems to focus mainly, at least, on developing the materialistic structure and conditions of life. Imarat al-Balagha, it's about making the life easier for the people, more comfortable for them, less challenging for them. And this is interesting. So when we look at the wordings, Imaratul Bilad, so Imran, which is the building something, building up, and the Bilad is the country, the nation, the territories, building up the territories, constructing and developing it. It means it's about building infrastructures, building dams, building power plants, building roads, urban and rural developments. And this is very interesting to see such a perspective from a figure who is more known about his spiritual leadership, like Ali alayhi salam. To see him pay attention to this so-called materialist development about the Imaratul Bilad, building up the those basic requirements, those infrastructures to develop the territory. And I see this, as some other scholars also mentioned, as one of the things that makes Ali alayhi salam and the ones that following him, so from his progeny, the other imams, and the Prophet somehow distinguished from the other people. Most people that we meet in our lives, if they are successful, they are successful in certain domain, certain aspect. They excel in certain category of the life. They are either, for example, great scholars, great, for example, philosophers, great scientists, great military leaders, great, for example, moral teachers, so on and so forth. But to have someone to gather all these aspects together. I remember, actually, that's the idea of God. I got it from one of my respected teachers. About 20 years ago, I was actually had the opportunity, the privilege to learn from Dr. Muhammad Hausen, who was teaching Western philosophy. He was originally he's an American citizen. His parents were Catholics, and his journey to Islam, his conversion to Islam, and specifically to Shia Islam, was very interesting for me. When he was explaining the reasons for which he decided to convert to Islam, he was saying that his parents actually, they were devoted Catholics, but he did not have kind of religious beliefs, and he was kidding, joking that philosophers usually they don't believe in anything because of all the conflicting views that they are exposed to. But then he mentioned the story of one of his students gifting him 2 books, one which is Nahj al-Balagha. He was saying that, I was also highlighting that the translation was awful, but he was saying that when I started reading Nahj al-Balagha, I was wowed by the personality of this man, Ali. And he said that I couldn't believe that a person can have so can excel in so different aspects of a human, being a philosopher, being a mystic, a moral teacher, being a powerful speaker and writer, being a unique military leader, being a skilled warrior, being a just and wise ruler, so on and so forth. How unique is this person, Ali? And this is what we can see in the letter when Ali Sam, he doesn't neglect anything. While he look at the spiritual growth as istislahu ahlaha, as perfecting one's soul, he does not neglect imaratu biladaha. You need also to build infrastructures. You need also to develop the land, the territories, to make life easier for the people. And it's the same insight that you see in divine rulers. For example, when we're talking about Prophet Suleiman and his rule, what Quran mentions about how majestic was his rule. So it is a kind of naive perception to think that Islamic, for example, view of politic, of how society must be run is just about, for example, religious values, is just about morals, is just about spiritual perfection. No, it is also the material life of the people. Is a successful government must also take care of what people need to have a comfortable life, to put their mind at ease, and so they can focus more on their moral and spiritual development and perfection. So just to review the four key responsibilities of a ruler that we just discussed: the economic administration, the maintaining security, reforming people, developing their life circumstances, conditions. These are the main categories Ali defines as the main responsibilities of the ruler. A question can be raised. Is there any order in the importance of these categories? Because Ali, as I mentioned, it starts with matter of the economic administration, then about the security, about reforming the people, that about the developing the territory. Is there any order that Ali intended to maintain here? I'm not certain. However, there are. So if I'm going to find an order here, I would say that it seems to make sense, seems to be an order there. Again, this is just my understanding. That first of all, Ali mentions economic administration, because as I mentioned, other categories, fulfilling other categories relies on the financial stability of the rule. If rule cannot spend on proper institutions, proper services, proper, for example, educational systems, so on and so forth, the other goals and the other categories cannot be fulfilled, cannot be achieved. And then the second point is, without a security and safety, for example, when a country is under the attack by foreign powers, when it is bleeding from domestic violence and crime, no room would be left for developing land, spiritual growth, and people would be so occupied with the threats and fear of their lives that they may not be able to think about the other aspects of their life. When we are talking about the spiritual growth, about istislahu ahlaha, so it can be also argued that the reason that Ali mentions istislahu ahlaha before mentioning imaratu biladaha, before mentioning discussing about development of the territory, is because the mental health, because the contribution to the spiritual growth and moral improvement of the people takes precedence over developing of the land. Why? Because a developed land with corrupted people, morally corrupted people, can be more destructive to humanity than beneficial. So there might be an order here that alayhi salam intended in the way that he names the main categories of responsibilities for a ruler. So inshallah, I will discuss it in the next session, what alayhi salam discussed later. It's very interesting that alayhi salam he doesn't start immediately to go and elaborate on these four categories. Instead, he starts after this excerpt of the letter. It starts about advising Malik about self-development, self-responsibilities that he has to work on himself, to develop himself spiritually. And we will look at how this goes in line with the Ali alayhi salam's broader picture of political rule. So you don't see usually, that's not what is actually we see, for example, if there is a manifest on political rule, there are certain instructions, legal instructions, so on and so forth. You don't see there are moral advice, or kind of moral instructions to precede the letter, to precede to, for example, to start a manifest of principles of rule with some moral expectations. But Ali alayhi salam ensures that he does that before going to and explaining, elaborating a ruler's responsibilities towards the people. He highlights a ruler's responsibility towards himself first, purifying himself, preparing himself so that he can fulfill those duties, inshallah, as I will explain it in the next session. So just to wrap up my discussion, I think these are very beautiful insights from Ali alayhi salam. We just covered few short points, less than maybe 1 or 2 sentences. But you see how deep the instructions are, how deep the categories are defined. And it can give an overall picture of what Ali alayhi salam is concerned about and what he later explains in this valuable letter. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the blessing, the insight, the understanding to benefit from this letter and the insight of Ahlul Bayt, peace be upon them, inshallah. Please recite the salawat.